graduating from UVM on Sunday.
Yay!
And
Congratulations.
then starting an internship with the administration over the summer.
That's very exciting. Congratulations. That's great. Super.
He's from Georgia. We gotta keep him around.
Okay. Oh, got you. Not Georgia, Vermont.
No, Georgia.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Super.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. So this is Friday, January. Had a moment just now. Let's do it all again. Start over. May 16th, 9 a.m. And we are looking at a pretty specific part of 479, which is about brownfields, which also, as I understand, pertains to S127. But we did not go over that. So we're just going to make sure that we have a thorough understanding of this brownfield section. So we have our legislative council with us. Mr. Grady, welcome. I believe so. But yeah, I don't think we have a new copy to look at. Or maybe I have a 5.1.
Yeah, I would thought we went also. I have. Oh, there it is. Yep. So. This next time. Jeffrey?
Yes.
This is Mike Grady, legislative council. The brownfield sections start on page 34 of draft 5.1. The first section relates to how to manage development soils. Development soils are soils that have one or more of three substances in them over the soil values, screening values set by the Department of Health, which means that they're technically hazardous at that point. So those three substances are arsenic, lead, and polyaromatic hydrocarbons, or PAH, PAH. These are soils that just generally, from being in existence in urban or semi-urban areas, have accumulated these substances from the environment, from deposition from the air, from just being naturally present in soil like arsenic is. And the issue is that when you're developing, you can manage your development soils on site if you have enough land to do that, enough property to do that. But if you're in a tight situation, you don't have a significant amount of property to manage your soil, you and say you're building a hotel and you have to dig deep to create the foundation, you have to then move that development soil somewhere. And currently there are three options. Manage it on site, but most tight urban development can't do that. You truck it to the landfill, or you take it to what's called a categorical facility. Categorical facility or facility, solid waste facilities, disposal facilities that ANR certifies permits for disposal of certain low risk waste. The problem is there isn't one in Vermont. So that really leaves the developer with two options: matching on site or taking it to the landfill. what section 19 of H 479 and with almost exact, if not the exact same section in 127 does, is it gives A&R the ability to approve the disposal, management of development soils, and just development soils. If it's exceeding the residential soil values or commercial soil values for another hazardous substance, it doesn't qualify. This is just those substances, lead, arsenic, cause, that wind up in soil just because of society or just because of they're there, right? And but still have a potential health risk. So A&R has this thing called the insignificant waste event approval, and it's where they can approve the collection, treatment, or processing of a waste for a limited duration if it meets certain criteria. So it's not a facility. It's not where you're going to continue to take these types of waste on a long-term basis. They're discrete events, discrete management for the use of a certain type of waste. And what they're proposing in section 19 is to allow the management of development soils through the insignificant waste approval process, subject to criteria. So they would only approve that insignificant waste disposal of development soils if they're generated from a hazardous material site, managed according to a corrective action plan or a soil management plan. And that's kind of where brownfields and development soils cross over when it's a hazardous material site. But again, there's substances in here that are exceeding residential values, commercial values, for another hazardous substance that are not development soils and have to be managed according to the island. And then the development soils have been tested for arsenic, lead, and POS pursuant to a monitoring plan that ensures that the soils do not reach above groundwater enforcement standards. They have to be located where soils is appropriate for the amount and type of material being managed. They have to be capped with clean soil. Any activity that may disturb the development, soils at the permitted location needs to be conducted according to a soil management plan. And the permittee has to file a record notice of where the soils are in the land record. So 15 years from now, somebody purchasing the property will be able to know that there were development soils that are disposed of at that site.
So. Yes, so then how does this, how do development soils happen? Because you kind of said just by life, why are all our sites compared to everything?
So
that's it happen.
So arsenic is just naturally in the soil. And it can be in the soil at levels that exceed the residential or commercial soil values. Lead and POS, it's from deposition. It's from air emissions over time, rain that has brought those chemicals to soil. And over time, they collect the levels that exceed the residential or commercial soil.
I just want to make sure, like, so if it's rain, why don't we all have the same problem?
Because it's often from combustion of gasoline. So where there's more of that, there's more opportunity for developing soil contamination.
Okay.
You might have remembered a few years ago, there was when they were still composting in the Intervale. They found that their compost was exceeding hazardous values, and it was because the leaves that they were composting were sucking up POS at a level that exceeded the soil values. And so
They thought they were nice.
they thought they were doing something that was gonna be organic and, you know, cyclical waste management, but it was actually concentrating in having the substance.
Small house, yes, go ahead.
So is there such a thing as like certified clean soil? In other words, the town was ditching on the side of the road, and they could show up and say, hey, you want some fill? But we spread this stuff around,
There are ways to determine if your soil is clean.
So who knows that?
You can do it yourself, you can test yourself. So there's a whole rule, it's called the I rule, it's the investigation of some cases in properties rule. And it dictates what you should do when you're developing for the management of soil. You know, if you're the investigation and remediation of contaminated properties. If you're buying or developing, one of the first things you do is a soil test to make sure that the property isn't doesn't have a contamination issue. Because as I think you all know, if it's contaminated by a hazardous material, then the owner of that property is subject to liability for the cleanup of it. So nobody wants to buy liability. And so they test the soil to determine whether or not there's a hazardous issue.
So they do that if they suspect. It's- So they do it based, for some reason, they suspect that it's just because of location or.
At my previous job, I worked for General Electric and corporate environmental transactions, anything that we weren't leasing, we tested.
Since we're stopped here, so arsenic that's naturally occurring in soil, is that pretty consistent across the state?
No, it is not, it is not,
Okay.
it can vary from site to site.
Okay, and maybe we're getting to this, but you know, in all of the percolating of environmental solutions to human-made problems, one of the things that comes up sometimes is like bioremediation and being able to pull toxic chemicals out of the ground through various kinds of plants or fungi or whatever. But it sounds like, you know, in the case of the leaves, that turned into a toxic product. And then let's say you were doing that on purpose to get the pods in this case out of the soil. Then I think we're getting to what's gonna be a different solution, but otherwise you're stuck in this position of either having to landfill it or.
Truck it out, station it, incinerate it.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, thank you for teach work.
Because if it gets to a level where it's really. I mean, if you're using bioremediation and sucking up everything, it's gonna. I mean, the bioaccumulation usually concentrates that hazardous material and it starts to limit what you can do with that.
Okay,
And so,
right, with that material,
right,
yeah. Okay. Unless there's more questions, oh, yeah, we have one more,
So I
okay.
noticed on 89. Down in the between the Jacksons, but it's like ALT. It's dumping. Soil and water, wood fiber, stuff that they're cleaning up on the side of the road. Does that all have to be tested before it's done?
are you meaning the
The pull-off areas, so no U-turns,
Yeah, I know what you're talking.
most of it's.
well, the AOT has some really pretty strict requirements for the fill that they use. Like they won't use recycled glass.
Right.
As fill because it might have a hazardous component to it, and so they're very particular about the fill that they use.
All right, let's keep going.
So that takes you to page 37. Section 21, this is in the brownfields property cleanup program. So does everybody know what brownfields is? It's a program to encourage the development of sites that might have hazardous contamination issues. And what is done is that there's a plan that's developed for the management of the site. So that any risks are mitigated. And then there's a plan for the development so that the development doesn't aggravate any risks. But how do you get a person to develop land where there's liability that is potentially attached because of the hazardous nature of the track? You release them from the liability, write a letter that says the state is releasing you from the liability for that site. But what goes along with that is incentive, financial incentive for the developer or for the owner of that property to manage it so that it does turn from usually an unused, untaxed hazardous waste site or hazardous materials site to a site that's developed and producing either, you know, tax base or recreational use for the municipality. So there's a fund, there's both a federal fund, there's a brownfield revitalization fund that has a federal component and a state component. There's priority assistance under that. There's priority development of points. And what section 21 does, it says when conducting the review underneath the brownfield chapter, often called FRELA, the secretary shall prioritize the review of remediation at sites that contains housing that are planned for construction or rehabilitation of single family or multi-family housing. You might think, are you going to build housing on a brownfield site? And it does get built on brownfield sites. So if there is going to be housing at one of these sites for purposes of review, funding, that residential housing will get some priority in the system. And then moving on, page 37, section 2, there has been some criticism of the speed and ease of working through the brownfields program. The Agency of Natural Resources has proposed that they do a survey of stakeholders in the brownfields program to identify areas that present challenges to the redevelopment of contaminated properties. And an analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of implementing a licensed site professional program. And that's a program where you have people that are tasked with managing these sites. It's, you know, one of my friend's kids just graduated from college and is a construction site manager for the US Navy, and they send him all around the country to manage these construction sites. But hazardous materials sites have other challenges, and so having someone that knows how to manage those challenges, how to work with developers, how to work with the excavators, the construction companies, etc. They're going to look at whether or not that is something that the state should implement for brownfields programs for the purposes of accelerating development on those sites through those engineers. And then section 23, this is a little bit different from the language that I've seen. So there was a appropriation previously to the Agency of Natural Resources for brownfields, and it was just an appropriation to the agency. And then, oh, I know what this is. Sorry, the agency spent some of that money, and originally what the language said is it was just transferring that appropriation from DEC to the Environmental Contingency Fund without recognizing that some of that money had been spent already And so this new language basically authorizes the disbursement of 2 million from the environmental contingency fund. For assessment planning being of a brownfield site. So the money that's already been at DEC is going to be used for the ECF. The ECF is the state's kind of, well, it has many functions, but one of its functions is to respond to hazardous materials releases. But it's also used to plan for how to do remediation at hazardous material sites. So if you can use $2 million from the ECF for brownfields, you're gonna have more options than. There's just a lot of things you can do under the ECF for brownfields, and this just gives the agency more flexibility. And that's it.
Great. I have one question. You mentioned Barella. I vaguely remember dealing with Barella when I was mayor, working in the transit centers, bike paths, et cetera. Is that an acronym?
Yes.
What is it? It's sorry,
Brownfield response and environmental liability, what's the second now?
even just.
Brownfield reuse and environmental liability limitation program.
Station. Okay. Cool, all right, thank you. Great, so at this point, any questions about brownfield? I mean, this to me sounds great, like if we can speed up the process. And
Provide another option for development, so
yeah, exactly.
prioritize housing.
Prioritize that. Yeah, that all sounds great. It is kind of wild to me that you have naturally occurring arsenic levels that are problematic. But there we go. Yes.
My father-in-law, his water supply had naturally occurring arsenic.
Mhm.
Family uses. It's sort of second wife trying to kill him.
Oh,
Because the arsenic
God.
system, and then they finally figured out it was in the water, so. Then we've been drinking that water for.
Oh, no.
It's normally noticed with young children, they start to like have significant health effects, including they like turn colors and.
Oh, okay.
So then, dumping rights, you familiar with dumping rights around Florida country? Where,
Around quarries.
yeah, they had, you got mineral rights and you have dumping rights where. Your property, even though they haven't been using it, when it was sold or purchased by this quarry operation. Your property would have dumping rights, so if people show up and all of a sudden start dumping. Refuse from the quarry documents.
So quarries are one of those types of ways that you can get that categorical facility authority. I don't know if that kind of interfaces with dumping rights. So I haven't heard of dumping rights before. I've only heard of minerals.
This constituent I was talking to recently, all of a sudden trucks start showing up and dumping on the property. Which you said was categorical.
Categorical waste.
Talking about brownfields. We are, yes. Okay. I'll defer to that. It was.
Want to do Ann?
Well, this was just educational. for us.
Okay.
So we're
Is there a
just.
section where you want to tell us about brownfield?
Yeah, so it's in 479 as well as 127, S127.
Is it okay?
Yeah, seems great.
Okay.
Super, okay.
I don't think I'm in here the rest of the meeting.
No, we, in fact,
We canceled.
we're done.
All right, have a good one.
the day, you too. Okay, well, team, that is the end of our testimony for this morning, so, thank you all. And, if we need to meet for any other reason, we'll